The big story coming in from the United States. A while ago, a violent attack unfolded in New York City. There was an explosion followed by incessant firing. The attack unfolded here. Take a look at the location. The 36th Street station of Brooklyn subway. At around 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, an unidentified suspect wearing a gas mask and a worker's vest went on a rampage.
Some of them very gruesome individuals lying with blood on the platform, which initially came out. And
preliminary reports saying the attack happened on board the train. The attacker first detonated a smoke device and then fired multiple rounds of bullets. Who was the attacker? That is yet to be ascertained. What were his motives? Too unclear at this point. The New York police saying he is still at large. Other visuals from the site showing injured passengers lying on the subway floor engulfed in smoke. How many people have been injured? So far, the figure stands at 13. They've all been shifted to a nearby hospital. The extent of their injuries remains unclear. A passenger who witnessed the aftermath has shared these details. Listen in.
It was like 9 or so, and we saw commotion. We saw cop cars pulling up, so we were concerned. We were gonna go outside and check what was going on, but we didn't actually go downstairs, which we're glad we didn't. But we saw an ambulance coming out with a stretcher with a person on it. Their leg was injured. I'm not sure exactly what went on or what was going on. And then we saw after that 2 ambulances coming out with 2 people like hopping on one leg.
Meanwhile, the New York Police Department has launched a sweeping investigation. It has surrounded the entire area and is looking for the attacker. The NYPD has also issued an advisory asking people to avoid this area for the next couple of hours. It has also urged all eyewitnesses to reach out to them at the earliest. Alexa Avales, a New York City Council member who represents the area where this attack occurred, has urged people to exercise caution and seek alternate travel routes. Justin Brannon, another NYC Council member, has urged people to avoid rumors that this could be a terror attack. He says that this is still a very active investigation and the job should be left to the first responders and the detectives. Meanwhile, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, saying that the U.S. president has been briefed about the attack. She says the White House officials are also in touch with the city's mayor for any assistance. Remember, shootings in New York City have risen this year. According to the NYPD statistics, there have been at least 296 shooting incidents in the last 3.5 months. And this is a sharp increase from 260 such incidents last year. But an incident like this, a seemingly random attack targeted at passerbys involving indiscriminate gunfire, is slightly less common. Meanwhile, an audio clip is going viral on social media. It is reportedly of a passenger who witnessed the horror unfolding. It gives the exact details of the situation that led to the attack and what was happening there. Before we play it out for you, let's tell you, WION cannot verify the authenticity of this audio. Listen in.
The reaction of the passengers was terrifying because they were trying to get into our car away from something that was happening in the back of the train. None of us in the front of the train knew what was going on, but people were pounding and looking behind them, running and trying to get onto the train. The door locked between cars, and the people behind us, there was a lot of loud pops, and there was smoke in the other car, and people were trying to get in, and they couldn't. They were pounding on the door to get into our car. Once we got to 36th Street, they were herding us into the R train. People didn't know what was going on, and there was smoke throughout the platform. I did see people laying on the ground on the platform at 36th Street. There are people in the front of the car of the R train we were shuffled into that were laying on the ground that had obviously been shot. They brought some of these people out, and they are on the street at 4th and 25th.
Let's first get in further perspectives from Stephen Golub, international affairs expert with us from California, United States. Thanks very much for being here with us. Your initial reaction to what we are seeing unfolding there?
My initial reaction is horror. I'm from New York City originally. I've ridden on those train lines that pass through that station. Any shooting is, of course, absolutely horrifying, terrifying, but to occur on a subway track and for people to be panicking, rushing through a subway car to try to escape it and to feel trapped there is, if anything, even more horrifying. What makes this shooting even more distinctive and stand out compared to some others, many others that have occurred in the U.S., is that on the one hand, fortunately, no one is dead yet. But on the other hand, the fact that the perpetrator is at large, that the perpetrator had a gas mask, that an explosive device was used, and reportedly other undetonated devices were found at the scene, are also even more concerning than an ordinary shooting would be. I'll add one other irony to this story is that the recently elected mayor of New York, the new mayor of New York City, is a former police officer who's prioritized a decrease in gun violence, in homicides, as a real priority of his new administration.
Right. We were just talking about the numbers of those shooting incidents in New York, a spike as compared to last year. Extreme concern that has been raised over the number which has been going up. What do you think is leading to these rising numbers, as someone who's also lived in New York?
Well, that's a good question that a lot of American criminologists are scratching their heads over. It's a nationwide trend. It's not just New York City, by the way. Since 2020, gun violence has escalated in America. Lots of folks are linking this in some way to the pandemic, although exactly why that should be the case, there hasn't been a great explanation of. Of course, an underlying factor in the U.S. is compared with India, compared with China, compared with much of Europe, compared with much of the world, the level of gun ownership in the U.S. is much higher, and especially the availability of military-style weapons, semi-automatic weapons, and ownership of those by just ordinary people is much, much higher in the United States. That may be contributing to the overall fact that we have many more mass shootings in the U.S. than in other countries. But why the rise has been going on, as I said, may be pandemic related in terms of people being more concerned, more fearful, but there's no really solid explanation why this has been going on in New York or across the country.
Now, this attack comes just a day after Joe Biden announced those new gun control measures, restrictions imposed on so-called ghost guns that are weapons that are difficult to trace and can be assembled at home. But just talking about the very fact that Joe Biden promised change on this front, he promised to clamp down on these shooting incidents and promised gun control measures and reforms. Now, do you think he has done enough? What could he have done differently?
Oh, I don't think he could have done anything to prevent this. For one thing, it's important to understand that unlike many other countries, many laws in the U.S., including gun laws, are determined by states or cities. There's a certain amount the federal government can do to try to restrict this. But in the absence of really strong legislation, by which I mean we'd have to get laws passed through Congress, and given the strength of the gun lobby in the U.S., getting strong laws passed through the U.S. Congress, the fallback is what's going on in states. And Biden can't control that. He can't control whether an evenly divided Congress passes strong national legislation. There's only a limited amount he could do as the executive, as the president, and he's doing all he can. And he certainly can't control what's going on a state level, where where the National Rifle Association, a very powerful lobbying group, has blocked the kinds of rational gun control that you see in many countries across the nation. To get back to answering your question, he's doing what he can, but there's only a limited amount that the president can do under the current circumstances. One thing I'll just add on the question of why did this particular gunman go off like this? Is it terrorism, or is it someone going crazy? We just don't know. As you correctly and wisely pointed out, it really could be either at this point until we get more information.
Right. Stay with me. Let's also get in a better sense of what's happening on the ground. Our correspondent, Susan Tehrani, is with us. She has been tracking all those developments. Susan, take us through the latest that's coming in.
Well, Molly, at around 8:27 local time here at the heart of Brooklyn, New York, Sunset Boulevard, not only a residential hub, but a place where a lot of local businesses are located. At the subway station, law enforcement authorities, 911, got a call of an active shooter and a number of people being injured at that subway station. They responded to that call. We now know that 13 people have been injured. 5 to 7 people were shot. We don't know the reason for the other injuries right now. There is a gunman, a suspect at large. He was wearing a orange jumpsuit, a gas mask. He was black, about 5'5", and now authorities are looking for him. Right now, in and around that vicinity of Sunset Park, there are law enforcement. It has been cordoned off to not only pedestrians but vehicles as well. Schools are also shelter in place. There are a number of schools there. There are a number of parks there as well. It's really a residential area for the most part, but as I mentioned, there are a lot of local businesses over there as well. And the nature of that train station, really not only regarding the timing where people were going to work, but some were also coming from other bureaus and vicinities to Sunset Park, to their workplace, now that, a lot of COVID restrictions were also lifted. So really a hub. We saw videos coming in, a very packed subway station, and the fact that this incident and the motivation of this individual is not yet known, but we do know that it was premeditated. This person had planned to do this in advance because we know that he had some kind of explosive device that he flung into a subway cart at that Sunset Park station right before one of the train doors closed, and then either before or after, again, the details are very murky, he started shooting at several individuals. Those individuals are in hospital right now. We don't have reports of any fatalities. Hopefully we won't get any reports of that, but we are expecting a press conference from law enforcement officials from location. The situation that we are dealing with here in New York is that the newly elected Mayor Eric Adams, has COVID. So due to that COVID diagnosis, he will not be able to attend that press conference in person. He will be coordinating. We'll have to see how he'll be coordinating with law enforcement officials and other officials regarding this situation, and conducting what he must do. Really a test for him, as well, as he's just passing his first 100 days in office. But definitely not only a sense of panic for those individuals that were underground. We can imagine at that location in the early hours, rush hour in the morning on this Tuesday morning in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, but also other people who are just getting back into the thick of things, if you may, right after COVID restrictions have been lifted. The spring season has just, come upon us. We're just experiencing better weather. A lot of people are moving back into the city, and one of the promises of this new mayor was that he was working on the high crime rate, trying to bring it down. One of the first things that he did was get on one of the subways. That's really the heart and soul of New York City, if you may. It's the pulse of New York. It's one of the main means of transportation of this city. He got on one of those subways and he talked to local residents and said, what are your concerns? How can I make this subway train safer for you to be more comfortable? Because a lot of people were complaining not only about the issue of homelessness, pickpocketers, harassment, and so on and so forth, but something like this, of course, was unpredictable. It was unexpected. It wasn't something that people wanted to really think about happening. But then again, this is New York. This is something that is always in the back of every resident's mind, considering the fact that it was just last year, or this year, I might say, just a few months ago, that we commemorated the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So, you know, it has a lot of backstory. It's in the minds of a lot of people when something like this happens, on what the intentions are, what this means moving forward, how it's going to impact everyday life, what the motivations of this suspect were, so on and so forth. But ultimately, as the news and the details are coming in, we will keep you updated. But it's important also to note that not only is this individual and suspect at large, but the NYPD is also asking individuals to call the hotline, if they have any details and help in identifying this person. Also, I want to let you know that there are the N and R train lines that are very important, again, in transportation here in New York, not only in Brooklyn, but in the other 5 boroughs of New York, that take people from one location to the other. They have stopped electricity. They've been on a halt because of this manhunt. That itself has caused a lot of mayhem and a lot of traffic, a lot of detour for a lot of people who are going from one place to another. It just shows that this manhunt is not only limited to the vicinity of Brooklyn, to the borough of Brooklyn, but it has expanded to Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx, and elsewhere in New York as well, until law enforcement decide when it's sufficient and when they hopefully find this individual.
Right. We understand the American president has been briefed about the latest as well, and the White House has promised all assistance to the New York City mayor. What more can you tell us on that front? And if you can just describe to our viewers, as you mentioned, this was an attack that took place during rush hour. So there were a high number of people using that subway for their commute to work.
Absolutely. You know, you see just these videos coming in on social media, one after the other, some of them just with gruesome graphic images of individuals falling and laying down on the platform in a very crowded platform, subway platform, blood splattered on the platform. And while we do know that 5 to 7 people have been shot, that's the number that we're getting, but because it's so congested down there, and because it was during rush hour and there were so many people there, the number of injuries is at 13 right now. But you know, we don't know how these other individuals have been injured. Will the number of injuries go higher? And considering the fact that you know, people are so crammed in the subway underground, you know, how much other forms of injuries will be reported moving forward? Definitely a very terrifying experience. One eyewitness not only said that he was terrified, he also said that the individual that was firing the shots fired so fast that he couldn't really count how many rounds were being fired. Of course, we don't know what kind of weapon this individual was using, what kind of gun he was using. But those are the accounts that we're hearing. And then also, again, you know, video after video coming online on different social media platforms of people running and screaming, and really a chaotic scene in a short period of time before this person fled the scene.
Susan, stay on with us. We're coming back to you as and when further updates trickle in. A quick comment also from Stephen Golub, who's been with us, getting us a better sense of what this really means for the United States and the impact of this latest incident on the measures that should be taken, can be taken when it comes to gun violence. Stephen, as we were discussing earlier, gun violence is an issue that has plagued America for the longest time. Successive governments have failed to actually bring down the number of these shooting incidents. Why are the American lawmakers so helpless in front of the gun lobby? If you can just elaborate for our viewers in a few quick comments.
Good question. Fundamentally, because the Republican Party is very much under the sway of the National Rifle Association, that big lobbying group I mentioned. It's really blocked most sensible gun control legislation on a national and in some states on a local level. The NRA, the National Rifle Association, has such control, partly because of campaign donations, but also because it can mobilize gun owners against even legislation that would prevent military-type weaponry from being readily available to just ordinary people. From your correspondent's excellent report, it sounds like it might have been a military weapon. The rapid fire that went off sounds like the kind of weapon you might encounter in Afghanistan rather than what you'd expect on the streets or the subways of New York City. And even legislation that would limit or ban that has gone nowhere in much of the United States and has gone nowhere nationally because of this NRA influence, largely on the Republican Party, which, as you know, is one of our two main parties.
Stephen Golub, appreciate very much your joining us on the broadcast and sharing those perspectives. We will continue to monitor the latest coming in from the United States. The New York subway shooting has left 13 people injured. The manhunt is now underway to nab the suspect. And speaking of the United States, WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.